Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to our study of Ouspensky's In Search of the Miraculous. And today we've arrived at chapter 16. 3 more to go, 2 after this. And again, I always say to begin these streams, it's an interesting chapter. And this is yet again an interesting chapter for 2 reasons. One, Ouspensky is talking about the sort of revolution that is uprising. I don't know all the details, I haven't looked into that line of study, but sort of things are becoming a lot more difficult to operate in Russia of the time. So there's that going on. The political life of the group, but also it gets very metaphysical because Ouspensky starts talking, well, and Gurdjieff as well, but Ouspensky begins now to do a lot more of his own theorizing about Gurdjieff's ideas, about different levels and states of being and vibrations and density of matter and all these things, and also time in different dimensions, which can get very sort of heady and squirrely. And again, like I always say, one must go back, listen again, take a moment, contemplate these things. And hello there, Zanya. I'm glad you could make it, and welcome. And so, as always, what I'll do is I'll just briefly run through the contents. This is a longer chapter. The contents are rather heavy, and I'll just leave it on the screen for a moment and read out the my highlights, what I think is most interesting. I won't read everything out, but feel free to pause later on and have a look. But here we go. Like I say, the historical events of winter, Noah's Ark, consciousness of matter, degrees of intelligence, different storied machines, and how the classification of creatures by the cosmic traits, what a man's possibility of changing his food, Gurdjieff leaving Petersburg for the last time, an interest in transfiguration. There's a journalist that sees Gurdjieff, and again, I'll just down there you can see towards the bottom the table of time in different cosmoses. So very interesting stuff. And with all that being said, let's get right into the text of chapter 16 of Gurdjieff's In Search of the Miraculous. As always, I'll be reading the text, but I'll check into the chat every now and again and address any questions at the end. So please get them in, and I'll read them at the end. And as always, I'm always happy to answer questions, and I've been getting some really great questions recently, so keep those coming. But for now, let's read chapter 16. By this time, that is, by November 1916, the position of affairs in Russia had begun to assume a very gloomy aspect. Up to this time, we, at any rate most of us, had by some miracle kept clear of events. Now, events were drawing nearer to us, that is to say, they were drawing nearer to each one of us personally, and we could no longer fail to notice them. It in no way enters into my task either to describe or to analyze what was taking place. At the same time, it was such an exceptional period that I cannot altogether avoid all mention of what was going on around us. Otherwise, I should have to admit that I had been both blind and deaf. Besides, nothing could have given such material for the study of the mechanicalness of events, that is, of the entire and complete absence of any element of will, as the observation of events at this period. Some things appeared or might have appeared to be dependent on somebody's will, but even this was illusion, and in reality it had never been so clear that everything happens, that no one does anything. And even in our very time, our current modern moment, this is always very helpful for me when I see things going downhill quickly, to just take this concept that everything happens, no one does anything, man is a machine under the influence of external influences. In the first place, it was clear to everyone who was able and who wanted to see it that the war was coming to an end, and that it was coming to an end by itself through some deep inner weariness, and from the realization, though dull and obscure yet firmly rooted, of the senselessness of all this horror. No one believed now in words of any kind. No attempts of any kind to galvanize the war were able to lead to anything. At the same time, it was impossible to stop anything, and all talk about necessity of continuing the war or the necessity of stopping the war merely showed the helplessness of the human mind, which was even incapable of realizing its own helplessness. In the second place, it was clear that the crash was approaching, and it was clear that nobody could stop anything, nor could they avert events or direct them into some safe channel. Everything was going on in the only way it could go, and it could go in no other way. I was particularly struck at this time by the position of professional politicians of the left who, up to this time, had played a passive role, but were now preparing to pass into an active one. To be precise, they showed themselves to be the blindest, the most unprepared, and the most incapable of understanding what they were really doing, where they were going to, what they were preparing, even for themselves. I remember Petersburg so well during the last winter of its life. Who could have known then, even assuming the very worst, that this was its last winter? But too many people hated this city, and too many feared it, and its days, and its last days were numbered. Yes, Zanyar says, it's a great comment, so I'll just read it. One can observe that it is during global catastrophes and big natural disasters that great amounts of knowledge are released, and I think that's right, and Gurdjieff and Ouspensky speak about that earlier on in the book, and how it's there for everyone, but not everyone wants it, so there's more than enough for the individuals who are interested. Back to the text here. Our meetings continued. During the last months of 1916, G did not come to Petersburg, but some of the members of our group went to Moscow and brought back new diagrams and some notes which had been made by G's Moscow pupils under his instruction. Many new people made their appearance in our groups at this time, and although it was clear that everything must come to some unknown end, G's system gave us a certain feeling of confidence and security. We often spoke at this time of how we should feel in the midst of all this chaos if we had not got the system which was becoming more and more our own. Now we could not imagine how we could live without it and find our way in the labyrinth of all existing contradictions. This period marks the beginning of talks about Noah's Ark. I'd always considered the myth of Noah's Ark to be an esoteric allegory. Many of our company had now begun to see that this myth was not merely an allegory of the general idea of esotericism, but was at the same time a plan of any esoteric work, our own included. The system itself was an ark in which we could hope to save ourselves at the time of the flood. G arrived only at the beginning of February 1917. At one of the first talks, he showed us an entirely new side to everything he had spoken about up till then. So far, he said, we have looked upon the table of hydrogens as a table of vibrations and of the densities of matter, which are in an inverse proportion to them. We must now realize that the density of vibrations and the density of matter express many other properties of matter. For instance, till now we have said nothing about the intelligence or the consciousness of matter. Meanwhile, the speed of vibrations of a matter shows the degree of intelligence of the given matter. You must remember that there is nothing dead or inanimate in nature. Everything in its own way is alive, everything in its own way is intelligent and conscious. And so I believe this would be, what's the term? Nope, I can't think of the term, but there's a term for every, even inanimate matter is, panpsychism, there it goes, it came to me. This is panpsychism, I believe, where everything has some level of intelligence and consciousness. Only this consciousness and intelligence is expressed in a different way on different levels of being, that is, on different scales. But you must understand once and for all that nothing is dead or inanimate in nature. There are simply different degrees of animation and different scales. The table of hydrogens, while serving to determine the density of matter and the speed of vibrations, serves at the same time to determine the degree of intelligence and consciousness, because the degree of consciousness corresponds to the degree of density or the speed of vibrations. This means that the denser the matter, the less conscious it is, the less intelligent, and the denser the vibrations, the more conscious and the more intelligent the matter. And so this is what panpsychism doesn't contain, this relative aspect, what Gurdjieff's talking about. And so maybe I can do a video about this later on, probably be quite a clickbaity title about panpsychism perhaps, but panpsychism doesn't contain this relative aspect. So again, just a brief note there for anyone interested in panpsychism. Really dead matter begins where vibrations cease, but under ordinary conditions of life on the Earth's surface we have no concern with dead matter, and science cannot procure it. All the matter we know is living matter, and in its own way it is intelligent. In determining the degree of density of matter, the table of hydrogens also determines by this the degree of intelligence. This means that in making comparisons between the matters which occupy different places in the table of hydrogens, we determine not only their density, but also their intelligence. And not only can we say how many times this or that hydrogen is denser or lighter than another, but we can say how many times one hydrogen is more intelligent than another. The application of the table of hydrogens for the determination of the different properties of things and of living creatures, which consist of many hydrogens, is based on the principle that in each living creature and in each thing there is one definite hydrogen, which is the center of gravity. It is, so to speak, the average hydrogen of all the hydrogens constituting the given creature or thing. To find this average hydrogen, we will, to begin with, speak about living creatures. First of all, it is necessary to know the level of being of the creature in question. The level of being is primarily determined by the number of stories in the given machine. So far we have spoken only about man. And we have taken man as a three-story structure. We cannot speak about animals and man at one and the same time because animals differ in a radical way from man. The highest animals we know consist of 2 stories and the lowest of only 1 story. G made a drawing, figure 56, and here you can see man with 3 stories, a sheep with 2 stories, and a worm with 1 story. Which, that's what I've just said, so I won't read that again. At the same time, the lower and middle stories of man are, so to speak, equivalent to the sheep and the lower story to the worm, so that it can be said that a man consists of a man, a sheep, and a worm, and that a sheep consists of a sheep and a worm. Man is a complex creature. The level of his being is determined by the level of being of the creatures of which he is composed. The sheep and the worm may play a bigger or a smaller part in man. Thus, the worm plays the chief part in man number 1, in man number 2 the sheep, and in man number 3 man. But these definitions are important only in individual cases. In a general sense, man is determined by the center of gravity of the middle story. The center of gravity of the middle story of man is hydrogen 96. The intelligence of hydrogen 96 determines the average intelligence of man, that is, the physical body of man. The center of gravity of the astral body will be hydrogen 48. The center of gravity of the third body will be hydrogen 24. And the center of gravity of the fourth body will be hydrogen 12. If you remember the diagram of the 4 bodies of man which has been previously given, and in which the average hydrogens of the upper story were shown, it will be easier for you to understand what I am now saying. G drew this diagram, and so again this is a good example of how one must go back to a previous page of the book or a previous section, reread that bit, come back, read this bit, try and put them all together, and that way you can get the most out of these ideas and concepts. The center of gravity of the upper story is only 1 hydrogen higher than the center of gravity of the middle story, and the center of gravity of the middle story is 1 hydrogen higher than the center of gravity of the lower story. But, as I have already said, to determine the level of being by the table of hydrogens, it is usual to take the middle story. With this as a point of departure, it is possible, for example, to solve such problems. Let us suppose Jesus Christ to be man number 8. How many times is Jesus Christ more intelligent than a table? That's quite the sentence. A table has no stories. It lies wholly between hydrogen 1536 and hydrogen 3072, according to the third scale of the table of hydrogens. Man number 8 is hydrogen 6. This is the center of gravity of the middle story of man number 8. If we are able to calculate how many times hydrogen 6 is more intelligent than hydrogen 1536, we shall know how many times man number 8 is more intelligent than a table. But in this connection, it must be remembered that intelligence is determined not by the density of matter, but by the density of vibrations. The density of vibrations, however, increases not by doubling as in the octaves of hydrogen, but in an entirely different progression which many times outnumbers the first. If you know the exact coefficient of this increase, you will be in a position to solve this problem. I only want to show that, however strange it looks, the problem can be solved. Partly in connection with what I have just said, it is imperative that you should understand the principles of the classification and the definition of living beings from the cosmic point of view, from the point of view of their cosmic existence. In ordinary science, classification is made according to external traits, bones, teeth, functions, mammals, vertebrates, rodents, and so on. In exact knowledge, classification is made according to cosmic traits. As a matter of fact, there are exact traits identical for everything living, which allows us to establish the class and the species of a given creature with the utmost exactitude, both in relation to other creatures as well as to its own place in the universe. These traits are the traits of being. The cosmic level of being of every living creature is determined, first of all, by what this creature eats, second, by what he breathes, and thirdly, by the medium in which it lives. These are the three cosmic traits of being. Take, for instance, man. He feeds on hydrogen 768, breathes hydrogen 192, and lives in hydrogen 192. There is no other being like him on our planet, although there are beings higher than he is. Animals such as the dog can feed on hydrogen 768, but they can also feed on a lower hydrogen, not 768, but approaching 1536, food of a kind impossible for man. A bee feeds on a hydrogen much higher than 768, even higher than 384, but it lives in a hive in an atmosphere where man could not live. From an outward point of view, man is an animal, but he is an animal of a different order from all other animals. Let us take another example, a flower worm. It feeds on flour, a hydrogen far coarser than hydrogen 768, because the worm can also live on rotten flour. Let us say that this is also 1536. It breathes hydrogen 192 and lives in hydrogen 1536. A fish feeds on hydrogen 1536, lives in hydrogen 384, and breathes hydrogen 192. A tree feeds on hydrogen 1536, breathes only partly hydrogen 192 and partly hydrogen 96, and lives partly in hydrogen 192 and partly in hydrogen 3072, which is soil. If you try to continue these definitions, you will see that this plan, so simple at the first glance, makes it possible to determine the most subtle distinctions between classes of living beings, especially if you bear in mind that hydrogens, taking them as we have by octaves, are very broad concepts. For example, we took it that a dog, a fish, and a flower worm alike feed on hydrogen 1536, implying by this hydrogen substances of organic origin which are not good for human food. Now, if we realize that these substances in their turn can be divided into definite classes, we shall see the possibility of very exact definitions. It is exactly the same with air and exactly the same with the medium. These cosmic traits of being are immediately connected with the definition of intelligence according to the table of hydrogens. The intelligence of a matter is determined by the creature for whom it can serve as food. For example, which is more intelligent from this point of view, a raw potato or a baked potato? A raw potato can serve as food for pigs and a baked potato as food for man. A baked potato is more intelligent than a raw potato. Another very interesting sentence. A baked potato is more intelligent than a raw potato. If these principles of classification and definition are understood in the right way, many things become clear and comprehensible. No living being can change its food at will, or the air it breathes, or the medium in which it lives. The cosmic order of each being determines its food, as well as the air it breathes and the medium in which it lives. When we talked before about the octaves of food in the three-story factory, we saw that all the finer hydrogens needed for the working, the growth, and the evolution of the organism were prepared from three kinds of food. That is, from food in the strict meaning of the word, eatables and drink, from air which we breathe, and from impressions. Now let us suppose that we could improve the quality of food and air, feed, let us say, on hydrogen 384 instead of 768, and breathe hydrogen 96 instead of 192. How much simpler and easier the preparation of fine matters in the organism would be then. But the whole point is that this is impossible. The organism is adapted to transform precisely these coarse matters into fine matters, and if you give it fine matters instead of coarse matters, it will not be in a position to transform them, and it will very soon die. Neither air nor food can be changed, but impressions, that is, the quality of the impressions possible to man, are not subject to any cosmic law. Man cannot improve his food, he cannot improve the air. Improvement in this case would be actually making things worse. For instance, hydrogen 96 instead of 192 would be either very rarefied air or very hot, incandescent gases which man cannot possibly breathe. Fire is hydrogen 96. It is exactly the same with food. Hydrogen 384 is water. If man could improve his food, that is, make it finer, he would have to feed on water and breathe fire. It is clear that this is impossible. But while it is not possible for him to improve his food and air, he can improve his impressions to a very high degree, and in this way introduce fine hydrogens into the organism. It is precisely on this that the possibility of evolution is based. A man is not at all obliged to feed on the dull impressions of H48. He can have both H24, H12, and H6, and even H3. This changes the whole picture, and a man who makes higher hydrogens, the food for the upper story of his machine, will certainly differ from one who feeds on the lower hydrogens. In one of the following conversations, G again returned to the subject of classification according to cosmic traits. There is still another system of classification, he said, which you also ought to understand. This is a classification in an altogether different ratio of octaves. The first classification by food, air, and medium definitely refers to living beings as we know them, including plants, that is to say, to individuals. The other classification, of which I shall now speak, leads us far beyond the limits of what we call living beings, both upwards, higher than living beings, as well as downwards, lower than living beings, and it deals not with individuals, but with classes in a very wide sense. Above all, this classification shows that there are no jumps whatever in nature. In nature, everything is connected and everything is alive. The diagram of this classification is called the diagram of everything living. And you're going to see in a moment, as we get down to the bottom of this section, figure 58, the diagram of everything living. And again, at first glance, these things might seem very silly, very sort of hyperbolic, that a diagram of everything living, what do you mean? How can you have that? But if you go back and over it again and sit with it for a long time and consider what Gurdjieff's saying, then it starts to make more and more sense. I don't think it ever maybe for some people it makes perfect sense, but For me, it just updates one's worldview and mental model and gives you more sort of, more things to work with as you're navigating your life. According to this diagram, every kind of creature, every degree of being is defined by what serves as food for this kind of creature or being of a given level, and for what they themselves serve as food. Because in the cosmic order, each class of creature feeds on a definite class of lower creature and is food for a definite class of higher creature, or higher creatures. G drew a diagram in the form of a ladder with 11 squares, and in each square, excepting the two higher, he put 3 circles with numbers. See figure 58 like this. So this is figure 58, and if you look towards the top, we have man, angels, archangels, the eternal unchanging, and the absolute. And if we go down from man, we have vertebrates, invertebrates, plants, minerals, and metals, and again down to the absolute. And like I say, this is the diagram of everything living, and here we have a bit of commentary upon it. Each square denotes a level of being, he said. The hydrogen in the lower circle shows what the given class of creature feeds on. The hydrogen in the upper circle shows the class which feeds on these features. And the hydrogen in the middle circle is the average hydrogen of this class, showing what these creatures are. And again, you need to go back to the section on hydrogens, or there's 2 or 3 on hydrogens to understand more fully and take that in again. The place of man is in the 7th square from the bottom, or the 5th square from the top. According to this diagram, man is hydrogen 24. He feeds on hydrogen 96 and is himself food for hydrogen 6. The square next below man will be vertebrates, the next invertebrates. Invertebrates are hydrogen 96. Consequently, man feeds on invertebrates. Do not for the moment look for contradictions, but try to understand what this may mean. And equally, do not compare this diagram with others. According to the diagram of food, man feeds on hydrogen 768. According to this diagram, on hydrogen 96. Why? What does it mean? Both the one is right and the other is right. Later, when you grasp this, you will piece everything together into one. The next square below is plants, the next minerals, the next metals, which constitute a separate cosmic group among minerals, and the following square has no name in our language because we never meet with matter in this state on the earth's surface. This square comes into contact with the absolute. You remember we spoke before about the holy, the firm. This is holy, the firm. At the bottom of the last square, he placed the small triangle with its apex below. Now on the other side of man is square 3, 12, and 48. This is a class of creatures which we do not know. Let us call them angels. The next square, 1, 6, 24, let us call these beings archangels. In the following square, he put figures 3 and 12 and 2 circles, each with a point at their centers, and called it the eternal unchanging. And in the next square he put the figures 1 and 6. He put a circle in the middle, and in this circle a triangle containing another circle with a point at its center. He called the absolute. So now we've had Gurdjieff's commentary. I'll show it to you once again. And I think the square at the top, the circle with a triangle and another circle and a dot in the middle is quite a popular, I don't know what you'd call it, esoteric symbol. And so that was Gurdjieff's commentary on the diagram of everything living. This diagram will not be very comprehensible to you at first, he said, but gradually you will learn to make it out. Only for a long time you will have to take it separately from all the rest. This was in fact all I heard from G about this strange diagram, which actually appeared to upset a great deal of what had been said before. In our conversations about this diagram, we were very soon agreed to take angels as planets and archangels as suns. Many other things gradually became clear to us, but what used to confuse us a great deal was the appearance of hydrogen 6144, which was absent altogether in the previous scale of hydrogens in the third scale, which ended with hydrogen 3072. At the same time, G insisted that the enumeration of hydrogens had been taken according to the third scale. A long time afterwards, I asked him what this meant. "It is an incomplete hydrogen," he said, "a hydrogen without the Holy Ghost. It belongs to the same, that is, to the third scale, but it is unfinished. Each complete hydrogen is composed of carbon, oxygen, and nitrogen. Now take the last hydrogen of the third scale, hydrogen 3072. This hydrogen is composed of carbon 512, oxygen 1536, and nitrogen 1024. Now further, nitrogen becomes carbon for the next triad, but there is no oxygen for it and no nitrogen. Therefore, by condensation, it becomes itself hydrogen 6144, but it is a dead hydrogen without any possibility of passing into anything further, a hydrogen without the Holy Ghost." This was G's last visit to Petersburg. I tried to speak to him about impending events, but he said nothing definite on which I could base my own actions. And so I think at this stage of the book, we hear less and less from Gurdjieff because he's gone to Moscow and later on to France, to Fontainebleau. And this is more Ouspensky's speaking about things. And so I think we're going to see less and less quotation marks denoting Gurdjieff speaking, and more just text like this, which is Ouspensky's words with Gurdjieff dipped in, and I'll try and be clear which is which as we go. So this is clearly Ouspensky speaking about his ideas. A very interesting event took place in connection with his departure. This happened at the railway station. We were all seeing him off at the Nikolaevsky station. G was standing talking to us on the platform by the carriage. He was the usual G we had always known. After the second bell, he went into the carriage. His compartment was next to the door, and he came to the window. He was different. In the window we saw another man, not the one who had gone into the train. He had changed during those few seconds. It is very difficult to describe what the difference was, but on the platform he had been an ordinary man like anyone else, and from the carriage a man of quite a different order was looking at us, with a quite exceptional importance and dignity in every look and movement, as though he had suddenly become a ruling prince or a statesman of some unknown kingdom to which he was travelling and to which we were seeing him off. Some of our party could not at the time clearly realize what was happening, but they felt and experienced in an emotional way something that was outside the ordinary run of phenomena. All this lasted only a few seconds. The third bell followed the second bell almost immediately, and the train moved out. I do not remember who was the first to speak of this transfiguration of G when we were left alone, and then it appeared that we had all seen it. Though we had not all equally realized what it was while it was taking place, but all, without exception, had felt something out of the ordinary. G had explained to us earlier that if one mastered the art of plastics, one could completely alter one's appearance. He had said that one could become beautiful or hideous, one could compel people to notice one, or one could become actually invisible. What was this? Perhaps it was a case of plastics. But the story is not yet over. In the carriage with G there travelled A, well-known journalist, who was at that time being sent away from Petersburg. This was just before the revolution. We who were seeing G off were standing at one end of the carriage, while at the other end stood a group seeing A off. I did not know A personally, but among the people seeing him off were several acquaintances of mine and even a few friends. 2 or 3 of them had been at our meetings, and these were going from one group to the other. A few days later, a paper to which A was contributing contained an article, On the Road, in which A described the thoughts and impressions he had on the way from Petersburg to Moscow. A strange Oriental had travelled in the same carriage with him, who, among the bustling crowd of speculators who filled the carriage, had struck him by his extraordinary dignity and calm, exactly as though these people were for him like small flies upon whom he was looking from inescapable heights. And if you've read Beelzebub's tales, you will know that that's how Beelzebub views humanity. A judged him to be an oil king from Baku, and in conversations with him, several enigmatic phrases that he received still further strengthened him in his conviction that here was a man whose millions grew while he slept, and who looked down from on high at a bustling people who were striving to earn a living and to make money. And I believe this is the article here of A about Gurdjieff. My fellow traveller kept to himself also. He was a Persian or Tartar, a silent man in a valuable Astrakhan cap. He had a French novel under his arm. He was drinking tea, carefully placing the glass to cool on the small windowsill table. He occasionally looked with the utmost contempt at the bustle and noise of those extraordinary gesticulating people, and they on their part glanced at him, so it seemed to me, with great attention, if not with respectful awe. What interested me most was that he seemed to be of the same southern oriental type as the rest of the group of speculators, a flock of vultures flying somewhere into Agrionian space in order to tear some carrion or other. He was swarthy, with jet-black eyes and a moustache like Selim Khan. Why does he so avoid and despise his own flesh and blood? But to my good fortune, he began to speak to me. They worry themselves a great deal, he said, his face motionless and sallow, in which the black eyes, polite as in the Oriental, were faintly smiling. He was silent and then continued. Yes, in Russia at present there is a great deal of business out of which a clever man could make a lot of money. And after another silence he explained. After all, it is the war. Everyone wants to be a millionaire. In his tone, which was cold and calm, I seemed to detect a kind of fatalistic and ruthless boasting which verged on cynicism, and I asked him somewhat bluntly, "And you?" "What?" he asked me back. "Do not you also want this?" He answered with an indefinite and slightly ironical gesture. It seemed to me that he had not heard or had not understood, and I repeated, "Don't you make profits too?" He smiled particularly quietly and said with gravity, "We always make a profit. It does not refer to us. War or no war, it is all the same to us. We always make a profit." G, of course, meant esoteric work, the collecting of knowledge and the collecting of people, but A understood that he was speaking about oil. It would be curious to talk and to become more closely acquainted with the psychology of a man whose capital depends entirely upon order in the solar system, which is hardly likely to be upset, and whose interests for that reason prove to be higher than war and peace. In this way, A concluded the episode of the Oil King. We were particularly surprised by G's French novel. Either A invented it, adding it to his own impressions, or G actually made him see, that is, presume, a French novel in some small volume in a yellow, or perhaps not even a yellow cover, because G, of course, did not read French. After G's departure, up to the time of the revolution, we only got news of him from Moscow once or twice. All my plans had long since been upset. I had not succeeded in publishing the books I intended to publish. I had not succeeded in preparing anything for foreign editions, although right from the beginning of the war I saw that my literary work would have to be transferred abroad. During the past 2 years I had given up all my time to G's work, to his groups, to talks connected with his work, to journeys from Petersburg, and had completely neglected my own affairs. Meanwhile, the atmosphere was growing gloomier. One felt that something was bound to happen, and that very soon. Only those upon whom the course of events still appeared to depend were unable to see and feel this. The marionettes failed to understand the danger that threatened them, and did not understand that the very same wire which pulls the villain with a knife in his hand from behind a bush makes them turn and look at the moon. A marionette theatre is worked in the same way. Finally, the storm broke. The great bloodless revolution took place, the most absurd and the most blatant lie that could have been thought of. But the most extraordinary thing of all was that people who were there on the spot, in the centre of everything that was happening, could believe in this lie, and in the midst of all the murders could speak about a bloodless revolution. I remember that we spoke at the time of the power of theories. People who had been waiting for the revolution, who had put all their hopes in it, and who had seen in it liberation from something, could not and did not want to see what was actually happening, and only saw what in their opinion ought to be happening. When I read in a leaflet printed on one side only the news of the abdication of Nicholas II, I felt that in this lay the centre of gravity of everything that took place. Ouspensky may rise from the grave and write at the end of his books, March 1917, the end of Russian history, I said to myself. I had no feelings whatever for the dynasty, but I simply did not wish to deceive myself as many others were doing at that time. I'd always been interested in the person of the Emperor Nicholas II. He seemed to me to be a remarkable man in many ways, but he was completely misunderstood and did not understand his own self. That I was right is proved by the end of his diary, which was published by the Bolsheviks and which referred to the time when, betrayed and left by all, he showed wonderful strength and even greatness of mind. But after all, the matter had nothing to do with him as a person, but with the principle of the unity of power and the responsibility of this power which he resented in himself. It is true that this principle was denied by a considerable part of the Russian intelligentsia, and for the people the word Tsar had long lost all significance. But this word still had a very great significance for the army and for the bureaucratic machine which, though very imperfect, nevertheless worked and held everything together. The Tsar was the indispensable central part of this machine. The abdication of the Tsar at such a moment was bound to destroy the whole machine, and we had nothing else. The celebrated public cooperation for the creation of which so many sacrifices had been made proved, as was to be expected, to be bluff. To create anything on the move was impossible. Events were moving at a breathless speed. The army broke up in a few days. The war in reality had stopped earlier. But the new government did not wish to recognize this fact. A fresh lie was started. And doesn't that strike true of current times? A fresh lie was started. But what was most surprising in all this was that people should find something to be glad about. I do not speak of the soldiers who broke out of barracks or out of the trains which were ready to carry them to the slaughter, but I was surprised at how intelligentsia, who from patriots immediately became revolutionaries and socialists, even the Novo Vremya suddenly became a socialist paper. The famous Menshikov wrote one article about freedom, but he evidently could not swallow it himself and gave it up. I think it was about a week after the revolution that I collected the principal members of our group in the quarters of Dr. S. and put before them my views on the position of affairs. I said that in my opinion there was no sense whatever in staying in Russia, and that we must go abroad. That in all probability there would be only a short period of comparative calm before everything began to break up and collapse. We could do nothing to help, and our own work would be impossible. I cannot say that my idea met with much approval. Most of them did not realize the gravity of the situation, and to them it seemed possible that everything might yet calm down and become normal. Others were in the grip of the customary illusion that everything that happens is for the best. To them my words seemed to be exaggeration. At all events they saw no need for haste. For others the main difficulty was that we had heard nothing from G, and had had no news of him for a long time. Since the revolution, there had only been one letter from Moscow, and from this it was possible to gather that G had gone away, but no one knew where. Finally, we decided to wait. At that time, there were two groups numbering about 40 persons in all, and there were also some separate groups which met at irregular intervals. Soon after the meeting at Dr. S.'s house, I received a postcard from G, written a month before in the train on the way from Moscow to the Caucasus, which had been lying all that time at the post office owing to the prevailing disorders. It was evident from the postcard that G had left Moscow before the revolution and as yet knew nothing of events when he wrote it. He wrote that he was going to Alexandropol. He asked me to continue the work of the groups until his arrival and promised to return by Easter. This communication faced me with a very difficult problem. I thought it senseless and stupid to stay in Russia. At the same time, I did not want to leave without G's consent, or, to speak more truthfully, without him. And he had gone to the Caucasus, and his card, written in February, that is, before the revolution, could have no relation to the present situation. At length, I again decided to wait, although I saw that what was possible today might become impossible tomorrow. Easter came. There was no news whatever from G. A week after Easter came a telegram in which he said he was arriving in May. The first provisional government came to an end. It was already more difficult to get abroad. Our groups continued to meet and awaited G. Our conversations used often to come back to the diagrams, especially when we had to talk to new people in our groups. It seemed to me the whole time that in these diagrams which we had got from G, there was a good deal left unsaid, and I often thought that perhaps gradually, with a deeper study of the diagrams, their inner meaning and significance would be revealed to us. As I keep saying, I suppose, that in diagrams, Gurdjieff has spoken about symbols before, hasn't he? That symbols are sort of moving things, and they update with our understanding, in a sense. Once, when looking through some notes made the year before, I paused at the cosmoses. I wrote earlier that the cosmoses particularly attracted me because they coincided completely with the period of dimensions of the new model of the universe. And that's Ouspensky's own work, The New Model of the Universe, very interesting. I mentioned also the difficulties which arose for us at one time in connection with the different understanding of the microcosmos and the tritocosmos. But by this time we had already decided to understand man as the microcosmos and organic life on Earth as the tritocosmos. And in the last conversation, G silently approved of this. G's words about different time in different cosmoses intrigued me very much, and I tried to remember what P had said to me about our sleep and waking, and about the breath of organic life. For a long time I could make nothing of it. Then I remembered G's words that time is breath. What is breath? I asked myself. 3 seconds. Man in a normal state takes about 20 full breaths, that is, inhalations and exhalations, to the minute. Consequently, a full breath takes about 3 seconds. Why are sleep and waking the breath of organic life? What are sleep and waking? For a man and for all organisms commensurable with him and living in similar conditions with him, even for plants, this is 24 hours. Besides this, sleep and waking are breath, as for instance, plants when asleep, that is at night, exhale, and when awake, that is by day, inhale. In exactly the same way, for all mammals as well as for man, there is a difference in the absorption of oxygen and CO2 by night and day, in sleep and waking. Reasoning in this way, I arrange the periods of breath and of sleep and waking in the following way. For the microcosmos, breath is 3 seconds and sleep and waking is 24 hours. For the tritocosmos, breath is 24 hours and sleep and waking, ? I obtained a simple rule of 3. By dividing 24 hours by 3 seconds, I got 28,800. And so now we're going to get into a rather heady, technical and sort of figure-dense portion. Again, that It's difficult to take in on first reading. I obtained a simple rule of 3. By dividing 24 hours by 3 seconds, I got 28,800. By dividing 28,800 days and nights by 365, I got within a small fraction 79 years. This interested me. 79 years, continuing the former reasoning, made up the sleep and waking life of organic life. This did not correspond to anything that I could think of in organic life, but it represented the life of man. Could one not continue the parallel further? I asked myself. I arranged the figures I had obtained in the following way. So let's do the first column first. Microcosmos man, breath 3 seconds, day and night 24 hours, and life 79 years. The tritocosmos in the middle, organic life, breath 24 hours, day and night 79 years, and the mesocosmos, earth, breath 79 years. Again, 79 years meant nothing in the life of the earth. I thereupon multiplied 79 years by 28,800 and got a little less than 2.5 million years. By multiplying 2.5 million years by 30,000 for shortness, I got a number of 11 figures. 75 billion, I believe. This figure should signify the duration of life of the earth. So far, these figures appear logically possible. 2.5 million years for organic life and 75 milliards of years for the earth. But then there are cosmoses lower than man, I said to myself. Let us try to see in what relation they will stand to this. I decided to make 2 cosmoses on the left, on the diagram, from the microcosmos, understanding by them first comparatively large microscopic cells, and then the smallest, admissible, almost invisible cells. Such a division of cells into 2 categories cannot be said to have been definitely accepted by science, but if we think of dimensions within the micro-world, then it is impossible not to admit that this world consists of 2 worlds as distinct in themselves as is the world of people and the world of comparatively large microorganisms as cells. I got the following picture, and I'll just leave that picture there for a moment. We've already seen the all of the figures from microcosmos to the right, so are just large cells. Day and night is 3 seconds, and the life is 24 hours, and a small cell's life is just 3 seconds. This was coming out very interestingly. 24 hours made up the period of life of the cell, and although the period of life of individual cells can in no way be considered as established, many investigators have arrived at the fact that for a specialized cell, such as a cell of the human organism, the period of life appears to be precisely 24 hours. The breath of the cell equals 3 seconds. This told me nothing. But the 3 seconds of life of the small cell told me a great deal, and it indicated above all why it is so difficult to see these cells, although from their size they should be accessible to vision in a good microscope. I tried further to see what would be obtained if breath, that is 3 seconds, were divided by 30,000. 1/10,000th part of a second was obtained. This period of duration of an electric spark, and at the same time the period of the shortest visual impression. For convenience in calculating for clarity, I took 30,000 instead of 28,800. 4 periods appeared to be connected with or separated from one another by one and the same coefficient of 30,000. The shortest visual impression, breath, or the period of inhalation and exhalation, the period of sleep and waking, and the average maximum of life. At the same time, each of these periods denoted a corresponding but lower period in a higher cosmos and a corresponding higher period in a lower cosmos. Without as yet drawing my conclusions, I tried to make a fuller table, that is, to bring into it all the cosmoses and to add 2 more of the lower ones, the first of which I called the molecule and the second the electron. Then again, for clarity, when multiplying by 30,000, I took only round numbers and only 2 coefficients, 3 and 9. Thus, 22,400,000 I took as 3 million, 72 billion I took as 90 billion, and 79 as 80, and so on. and I obtained the following table. Are you ready for the following table? There it is. So again, I suppose we should take the sort of middle table man. The impressions is 1/10,000th of a second. Breath is 3 seconds, night and day 24 hours, and life 80 years. And so I'll leave that there for a moment, but I'm not going to go through it all and read it all out, but you can come back and view that at your leisure. This table at once aroused in me very many thoughts. Whether it was possible to look upon it as correct and as defining exactly the relation of one cosmos to another, I was as yet unable to say. The coefficient 30,000 seemed too big, but at the same time I remembered that the relation of one cosmos to another is as 0 to infinity, and in the presence of such a relation no coefficient could be too big. The relation of 0 to infinity was the relation of magnitudes of different dimensions. G said that every cosmos was three-dimensional for itself. This meant that the next cosmos above it was four-dimensional for it, and the next cosmos below it two-dimensional. The next one above that five-dimensional, and the next one lower one-dimensional. One cosmos in relation to another is a magnitude of a greater or smaller number of dimensions, but there could only be 6 dimensions, or with 0, 7, and by this table 11 cosmoses were obtained. At the first glance this seemed strange, but only at the first glance, because as soon as I took into account the period of existence of any cosmos in relation to higher cosmoses, the lower cosmoses disappeared long before reaching the 7th dimension. Take, for example, man in relation to the sun. The sun appeared as the 4th cosmos in relation to man, taking man as the 1st cosmos. But man's long life, 80 years, was equal in time to one electric spark of the sun, one shortest possible visual impression. I tried to remember everything that G had said about cosmoses. Each cosmos is an animate and intelligent being. Each cosmos is born, lives and dies. In one cosmos it is impossible to understand all the laws of the universe, but 3 cosmoses taken together include in themselves all the laws of the universe, or 2 cosmoses, the one above and the one below, determine the cosmos which stands between them. By passing in his consciousness to the level of a higher cosmos, a man by this very fact passes to a level of a lower cosmos. I felt that here in each word was a clue to the understanding of the structure of the world, but there were too many clues. I did not know from which to start. How would movement from one cosmos to another appear, and where and when would the movement disappear? In what relation would the figures found by me stand to the more or less established figures of cosmic movements, as for instance the speed of movement of the heavenly bodies, the speed of movement of the electrons in an atom, the speed of light, and so on? When I began to compare the movements of various cosmoses, I obtained some very startling correlations. For example, for the Earth, the period of its rotation on its axis was equal to 1/10,000th of a second, that is, the speed of an electric spark. It is very doubtful whether at such speed the Earth could notice its rotation on its axis. If man rotated, rotation round the sun should occupy about 1/25th of a second, the speed of an instantaneous photograph. And taking into consideration the enormous distance which the Earth has had to traverse in this time, the inevitable inference is that the Earth could not be conscious of itself as we know it, that is, in the form of a sphere, but must be conscious of itself as a ring, or as a long spiral of rings. The latter was the more probable on the basis of the definition of the present as the time of breath. This was, by the way, the first thought that came into my mind when, a year previously, after the first lecture on cosmoses, G, in adding to what he had said earlier, said that time is breath. I thought at the time that perhaps he meant that breath was the unit of time, that is to say, for the direct sensation the period of breath is felt as the present. Starting from this and supposing that the sensation of self, that is, of one's body, is connected with the sensation of the present, I came to the conclusion that for the earth, with one breath in 80 years, the sensation of itself should be connected with 80 rings of a spiral. I had obtained a completely unexpected confirmation of all the conclusions and inferences of the new model of the universe. Passing to the lower cosmoses, that is, to the cosmoses in my table which stood to the left of man, I found already in the first of them the explanation of what had always appeared to me the most enigmatic and most inexplicable in the work of our organism, namely, the astonishing speed which was almost instantaneous of many inner processes. It had always seemed to me to be almost charlatanism on the part of physiologists that no due significance had been attributed to this fact. Science, of course, explains only what it can explain. But in this case it ought not, in my opinion, to conceal the fact and avoid it as if it did not exist, but should constantly draw attention to it, put it on record on every suitable occasion. A man who gives no thought to questions of physiology may not be astonished at the fact that the drinking of a cup of strong coffee or a glass of brandy or inhaling the smoke of a cigarette is immediately felt in the whole body, changes all inner correlation of forces and the form of character of the reactions. But it ought to be clear to a physiologist that in this quite imperceptible interval of time, approximately equal to one breath, a long series of complicated chemical and other processes are accomplished in the organism. The substance which has entered the organism is carefully analyzed. The smallest diversion from the usual is immediately noticed. In the process of analysis, it passes through a series of laboratories, it is resolved into its component parts and mixed with other substances, and in the form of these mixtures it is added to the fuel which nourishes the various nerve centers. All this must occupy a great deal of time. The seconds in our time in which this is accomplished make all this entirely fantastic and miraculous. But the fantastic side falls away when we realize that for the large cells which obviously govern the life of the organism, one breath continues for over 24 hours. In 24 hours, even in half that time, even in a third, that is, in 8 hours, which is equal to 1 second, it is possible to imagine all the processes which have been indicated being completed in an orderly way, exactly as they would be completed in a large and well-arranged chemical factory with various laboratories at its service. And yeah, just briefly, just come into the chat. Zanyar says he agrees with what I said. From midway of chapter 16 all the way to the end of the book, we will be having Ouspensky's theories without much input from G. So yeah, I think that's right. But of course, we must finish the book. And so it is what it is. Ouspensky's own writings, I suppose. But next, I think we'll come to Gurdjieff's own writings. It will be very, I can't wait. It'll be very interesting. Now, sorry, back to the text. Passing further to the cosmos of small cells which stand on the border or beyond the border of microscopic vision, I again saw an explanation of the inexplicable. For example, cases of almost instantaneous infection by epidemic and infectious diseases in general, particularly those where the causes responsible for the infection have not yet been found. If 3 seconds is the limit of life for a small cell of this kind and is equal to the long life of man, then what would be the speed at which these cells multiply when for them 15 seconds would be equal to 4 centuries? Further, passing to the world of molecules, I first of all came face to face with the fact that the brevity of the existence of a molecule is an almost unexpected idea. It is usually supposed that a molecule, although structurally very complicated, taken as a basic, so to speak, living interior of the bricks from which matter is built up, exists as long as the matter exists. We are obliged to part from this pleasant and soothing thought. The molecule, which is alive inside, cannot be dead outside and in remaining Alive, it must, like everything living, be born, live and die. The term of its life equal to an electric spark, or to 1/10,000th part of a second, is too small for it to act directly on our imagination. Some comparison, some analogy is necessary in order to understand what this means. The dying cells of our organism and their replacement by others bring us nearer to this idea. Dead matter, iron, copper, granite, must be renewed from within more quickly than our organism. In reality, it changes under our eyes. If you look at a stone, shut your eyes and immediately open them again, it will now not be the stone which you saw. In it, not a single one of the molecules which you saw the first time now remain, but even then you did not see the molecules themselves, but only their traces. I came again to the new model of the universe. This explained also why we cannot see molecules, about which I have written in chapter 2 of the new model of the universe. So it's funny, I didn't get it before, but he's very clearly, he's advertising his other book. In this book, isn't he? He's talking about his book, The New Model of the Universe, several times. Go buy it. Further, in the last cosmos, that is, in the world of the electron, I felt myself from the very beginning in the world of 6 dimensions. The question arose for me as to whether the relation of dimensions could not be worked out. The electron as a 3-dimensional body is too unsatisfactory. To begin with, it exists for 1/300th millionth part of a second. This is a quantity far beyond the limits of our possible imagination. It is considered that an electron within an atom moves in its orbit with the speed of 1 divided by a 15-figure number. And since the whole life of an electron in seconds is equal to 1 divided by a 9-figure number, it follows that during its lifetime an electron makes a number of revolutions round its sun equal to a 6-figure, or taking into account the coefficient, a 7-figure number. If we take the Earth in its revolution round the Sun, then according to my table, it makes in the course of its lifetime a number of revolutions round the Sun equal to an 11-figure number. It looks as though there was an enormous difference between a 7-figure and an 11-figure number, but if we compare with the electron, not the Earth, but Neptune, then the difference will be considerably less, namely the difference between a 7-figure and 9-figure number, that is, 2 figures in all instead of 4. And besides, the speed of revolution of an electron within the atom is a very approximate quantity. It should be remembered that the difference in the periods of revolution of the planets round the Sun in our system represents a 3-figure number, because Mercury revolves 460 times faster than Neptune. The relation of the life of an electron to our perception appears thus. Our quickest visual perception is equal to 1/10,000th second. The existence of an electron is equal to 1/30,000th of 1/10,000th second, that is 1/300 millionth part of a second, and in that time it makes 7 million revolutions round the proton. Consequently, if we were to see an electron as a flash in 1/10,000th of a second, we should not see the electron in the strict sense of the word, but the trace of the electron, consisting of 7 million revolutions multiplied by 30,000, that is, a spiral with a 13-figure number of rings, or, expressed in the language of, again, the new model of the universe, 30,000 recurrences of the electron in eternity. Time, according to the table which I had obtained, undoubtedly went beyond 4 dimensions, and I was interested by the thought whether it was not possible to apply to this table the Minkowski formula, the square root minus 1, I think. That's what that means. I'm no mathematician. Denoting time as the 4th world coordinate. The world of Minkowski, in my opinion, corresponded precisely to each of the cosmoses separately. I decided to begin with the world of electrons, and to take as t the duration of the life of an electron. This coincided with one of the propositions in the new model of the universe, that time is life. The result should show the distance in kilometers that light travels during the life of an electron. In the next cosmos, this should be the distance that light travels during the life of a molecule, in the next during the life of a small cell, then during the life of a large cell, then during the life of a man, and so on. The result for all cosmoses should be obtained in lineal measurement, that is, they should be expressed in fractions of a kilometer or in kilometers. The multiplication of a number of kilometers by, tick minus 1, the square root of minus 1, I think that is by the, oh, here we go. Ouspensky clears it up to me. The multiplication of a number of kilometers by, that is, by the square root of minus 1 ought to show that here we are not dealing with lineal measurements and that the figure obtained is a measure of time. The introduction of the square root of minus 1 into the formula, while it does not change the formula quantitatively, shows that the whole formula relates to another dimension. And so I'm just going to leave the stream for a moment. I just have to go somewhere just very quickly just to do something, but I'll be back in 1 minute. So if you're watching this on the catch up, skip forward 1 minute and I'll be back. Sorry about that, I'm back. In this way, in relation to the cosmos of electrons, the Minkowski formula takes the following form. The square root of minus 1, 300,000, 3.10 to the minus 1. And so this is all way over my head. I'll be honest with you guys. None of this makes any sense to me. And so if you're mathematically inclined or a mathematician or know what the Minkowski formula is, I'm sure there's many videos on YouTube. Maybe I should look it up. But this is all Greek to me. That is the square root of minus 1, which has to be multiplied by the product of 300,000, that is c, or the speed of light, 300,000 kilometers per second, and 1 divided by 300 million second, that is the duration of the life of an electron. Multiplying 300,000 by 3 billion, I don't know, will give 1 over 1,000, 10, goodness me, I'm no good with figures, huh? 1 over 1,000 kilometer, which is 1 meter. 1 meter shows the distance which light traverses during the life of an electron, traveling at the speed of 300,000 kilometers a second. The square root of minus 1, which makes 1 meter an imaginary quantity, shows that the lineal measurement of a meter in the case in question is a measure of time, that is, of the fourth coordinate. Passing to the world of molecules, we obtain the Minkowski formula in the following form. 1/10,000th part of a second, according to the table, is the duration of the life of a molecule. Multiplying 300,000 kilometers by 1/10,000 will give 30 kilometers. Time in the world of molecules is obtained in the form of the formula, the square root of minus 1, 30,000 30 kilometers represents the distance which light travels during the life of a molecule, or in 1/10,000th second. Further, in the world of small cells, the Minkowski formula takes the following form. Again, there you can see it. That is 900,000 kilometers multiplied by the square root of -1. 900,000 kilometers represents the distance which light travels during the life of a small cell, that is, in 3 seconds. Continuing similar calculations for the further cosmoses, I obtained for large cells an 11-figure number, showing the distance which light travels in 24 hours. For the microcosmos, a 16-figure number, showing the distance in kilometers which light travels in 80 years. For the tritocosmos, a 20-figure number. For the mesocosmos, a 25-figure number. For the deuterocosmos, a 29-figure number. For the macrocosmos, a 34-figure number. For the aeocosmos, a 38-figure number. For the protocosmos, a 42-figure number, or the square root of -1, 9.10 to the 41. In other words, it means that during the life of the protocosmos, a ray of light travels a lot of kilometers. The application of the Minkowski formula to the table of time, as I had obtained it, in my opinion, showed very clearly that the fourth coordinate can be established only for one cosmos at a time, which then appears as the fourth dimensional world of Minkowski. 2, 3, or more cosmoses cannot be considered as a four-dimensional world, and they require for their description 5 or 6 coordinates. At the same time, Minkowski's consistent formula shows for all cosmoses the relation of the fourth coordinate of one cosmos to the fourth coordinate of another, and this relation is equal to 30,000, that is, the relation between the 4 chief periods of each cosmos and between one period of one cosmos and the corresponding, that is, the similarly named period of another cosmos. And for any of you mathematicians out there, here's table 9. Fill your boots and make some sense out of that one, because I cannot. The next thing that interested me in the table of time in different cosmoses, as I called it, was the relation of cosmoses and of the time of different cosmoses to the centers of the human body. G spoke many times about the enormous difference in the speed of the different centers. The reasoning which I have cited above in regard to the speed of the inner work of the organism led me to the thought that this speed belongs to the instinctive center. With this as a basis, I tried to proceed from the thinking center, taking as the unit of its work, for example, the time necessary for one full apperception, that is, for the reception of an outside impression, the classification and definition of this impression, and for the responding reaction. Then, if the centers actually stand to one another in the relation of cosmoses in exactly the same amount of time through the instinctive center, there could pass 30,000 apperceptions through the higher emotional, and in the sex centers 30,000 to 30,000 squared, maybe, apperceptions, and through the higher thinking, 30,000 cubed apperceptions. At the same time, according to the law pointed out by G of the correlation of cosmoses, the instinctive center in relation to the head or thinking center should embrace 2 cosmoses, that is, the second microcosmos and the tritocosmos. Further, the higher emotional and the sex centers taken separately should embrace the third microcosmos and the mesocosmos. And finally, the higher thinking center should embrace the fourth microcosmos and the deuterocosmos. But the latter refers to the higher development, to that development of man which cannot be obtained accidentally or in a natural way. In man's normal state, an enormous advantage in the sense of speed over all the other centers should be possessed by the sex center, working 30,000 times faster than the instinctive or the moving, and 30,000 squared times faster than the intellectual. In the relation of centers to cosmoses in general, very many possibilities of study, from my point of view, had been opened up. The next thing that caught my attention was the fact that my table coincided with some of the ideas and even the figures of cosmic calculations of time, if it can be so expressed, which existed in the Gnostics and in India. A day of light is 1,000 years of the world, and 36 myriads of years and half myriad of years of the world, 365,000, are a single year of light. Here the figures do not coincide, but in Indian writings, in some cases, the correspondence was quite unquestionable. They speak of the breath of Brahma, days and nights of Brahma, an age of Brahma. If we take the figures for the years given in the Indian writings, then Mahamanvantara, that is, the age of Brahman, or, is that billion or trillion? 311 trillion, 40 billion? Or 311 billion, 40 million. I'm sorry, my maths is weak. Years, 15-figure number, almost coincides with the period of the existence of the sun, 16-figure number, and the day and night of Brahma, 8 billion, 640 million, 10-figure number, almost coincides with the day and night of the sun, 11-figure number. If we take Indian ideas of cosmic time without relation to figures, other interesting correspondences appear. Thus, if we take Brahma as the protocosmos, then the expression Brahma breathes in and breathes out the universe coincides with the table, because the breath of Brahma, or the protocosmos, a 20-figure number, coincides with the life of the macrocosmos, that is, our visible universe, or the starry world. I spoke a great deal with Z about the table of time, and it interested us very much as to what G would say about it when we saw him. Meanwhile, time was passing. At last, it was already early in June, I received a telegram from Alexandropol. If you want to rest, come here to me. That was G. In 2 days I left Petersburg. Russia, with no authorities, presented a very curious spectacle. It felt as though everything was existing and holding together simply by momentum. But the trains still ran regularly, and at the stations the sentries turned a deeply indignant crowd of ticketless travellers out of the carriages. I was travelling for 5 days to Tiflis instead of the normal 3. The train arrived at Tiflis at night. It was not possible to walk about the town. I was obliged to await the morning in the station buffet. The whole station was crammed with soldiers who had returned from the Caucasian front on their own account. Many of them were drunk. Meetings were held throughout the night on the platform facing the windows of the buffet, and resolutions of some sort were carried. During the meetings there were 3 court-martial, and 3 men were shot there on the platform. A drunken comrade who appeared in the buffet explained to everyone that the first man had been shot for theft, the second was shot by mistake because he had been mistaken for the first, and the third was also shot by mistake because he had been mistaken for the second. I was obliged to spend the day in Tiflis. The train to Alexandropol went in the evening only. The following morning I was there. I found G setting up a dynamo for his brother. And again I observed, as before, his remarkable capacity for adapting himself to any kind of work, to any kind of business. I met his family, his father and his mother. They were people of a very old and peculiar culture. G's father was an amateur of local tales, legends and traditions, something in the nature of a bard, and he knew by heart thousands and thousands of verses in the local idioms. They were Greeks from Asia Minor, but the language of the house, as of all the others in Alexandropol, was Armenian. For the first few days after my arrival, G was so busy that I had no opportunity to ask him what he thought of the general situation or what he thought of doing. But when at length I spoke to him about it, G told me that he disagreed with me, that in his opinion everything would soon quiet down and that we would be able to work in Russia. He then added that in any case he wanted to go to Petersburg to see the Nevsky with hawkers selling sunflower seeds that I had told him about, and to decide on the spot what had best be done. I could not take what he said seriously, because I knew by now his manner of speaking and I waited for something further. Indeed, while saying this with apparent seriousness, G, along with it, said something altogether different, that it would be good to go to Persia or even further, that he knew a place in the Transcaucasian mountains where one could live for several years without anyone knowing, and so on. On the whole, there remained with me a feeling of uncertainty, but all the same I hoped on the way to Petersburg to persuade him to go abroad if this was still possible. G was evidently waiting for something. The dynamo was working faultlessly, but we made no move. In the house there was an interesting portrait of G, which told me very many things about him. It was a big, enlarged portrait of G when he was quite young, dressed in a black frock coat with his curly hair brushed straight back. G's portrait determined for me with undoubted accuracy what his profession was at the time the portrait was made, though G never spoke of it. This discovery gave me many interesting ideas, but since this was my own personal discovery, I shall keep it to myself. Several times I tried to speak to G about my table of time in different cosmoses, but he dismissed all theoretical conversations. I liked Alexandropol very much. It contained a great deal which was peculiar and original, and so this section here where Ouspensky is talking about Alexandropol in Meetings with Remarkable Men, which we'll be reading next, Gurdjieff's own writing, we'll learn a lot more about his father, the bard, his mother, and his early life, and then, his friends and fellow seekers of truth. So I haven't read it for some years. It's well overdue a reading, and I'm looking forward to share that with the channel. Outwardly, the Armenian part of the town calls to mind a town in Egypt or northern India, the houses with their flat roofs upon which grass grows. There is a very ancient Armenian cemetery on a hill from which the snow-clad summit of Mount Ararat can be seen. There is a wonderful image of the Virgin in one of the Armenian churches. The centre of the town calls to mind a Russian country town, but alongside it is the bazaar, which is entirely oriental, especially the coppersmiths' row, where they work in open booths. There is also the Greek quarter, the least interesting of all outwardly, where G's house was situated, and a Tartar suburb in the ravines, a very picturesque, but, according to those in the other parts of town, a rather dangerous place. I do not know what is left of Alexandropol after all these autonomies, republics, federations, and so on. I think one could only answer for the view of Mount Ararat. I hardly saw G alone, and seldom succeeded in speaking to him. He spent a great deal of time with his father and mother. I very much liked his relationship with his father, which was full of extraordinary considerations. G's father was still a robust old man of medium height, with an inevitable pipe in his mouth and wearing an Astrakhan cap. It was dim cult to believe that he was over 80. He spoke very little Russian, but with G he used to speak for hours on end, and I always liked to watch how G listened to him, occasionally laughing a little, but evidently never for a second losing the line of the conversation, and the whole time sustaining the conversation with questions and comments. The old man evidently enjoyed these conversations, and G devoted to him all his spare time, and not only did not evince the least impatience, but on the contrary the whole time showed a very great deal of interest in what the old man was saying. Even if this was partly acting, it could not in any case have been all acting, otherwise there would have been no sense in it. I was very interested and attracted by this display of feeling on the part of G. I spent in all about 2 weeks in Alexandropol. At length, on one fine morning, G said that we would be going to Petersburg in 2 days, and we set off. In Tiflis we saw General S., who at one time used to come to our Petersburg group, and it looked as though the talk with him gave G a fresh view on the general situation and made him somewhat change his plans. On the journey from Tiflis I remember an interesting talk with G at one of the small stations between Baku and Derbent. Our train stood there a long time, letting through trains with comrades from the Caucasian front. It was very hot. A quarter of a mile away, the surface of the Caspian Sea was glittering, and all around us was nothing but fine, shining flint, with the outlines of 2 camels in the distance. I tried to lead G to talk about the immediate future of our work. I wanted to understand what he was going to do and what he wanted from us. Events are against us, I said. It is by now clear that it is not possible to do anything in the midst of this mass madness. It is only now that it is possible, G replied, and events are not against us at all. They are merely moving too quickly. This is the whole trouble. But wait 5 years and you will see for yourself now how what hinders today will prove useful to us. I did not understand what G meant by this. Neither after 5 years nor after 15 years did this become any clearer. Looked at from the point of view of facts, it was difficult to imagine in what way we could be helped by events in the nature of civil war, murder, epidemics, hunger, the whole of Russia becoming savage, and then the endless lying of European politics and the general crisis which was undoubtedly the result of this lying. But if looked at, not from the point of view of facts, but from the point of view of esoteric principles, then what G meant becomes more comprehensible. Why were there not these ideas earlier? Why did we not have them when Russia existed and when Europe was a comfortable and pleasant place abroad? It was here probably that lay the solution to G's enigmatic remark. Why were there not these ideas? Probably precisely because these ideas could come only in such a time when the attention of the majority is distracted in some other direction, and when these ideas can reach only those who look for them. I was right from the point of view of facts. Nothing could have hindered us more than events. At the same time, it is probable that precisely the events made it possible for us to receive what we had, and that's back to Zanya's comment earlier. That when these things happen, a lot of information is released for those who are ready to receive it. There remains in my memory one other conversation during this journey. Once, when the train was standing a long time in some station and our fellow travellers were walking on the platform, I put one question to G which I could not answer for myself. This was in the division of oneself into I and Ouspensky, how one can strengthen the feeling of I and strengthen the activity of I. You cannot do anything about it, said G. This should come as a result of all your efforts. He emphasized the word all. Take, for example, yourself. By now you should have felt your I differently. Try to ask yourself whether you notice the difference or not. I tried to feel myself, as G has shown us, but I must say that I did not notice any difference from the way I felt before. That will come, said G, and when it does come, you will know. No doubt whatever is possible. It is quite a different thing. Later I understood about what he was speaking, that is, about which kind of feeling and which kind of change, but I began to notice this only 2 years after this conversation. On the 3rd day of our journey from Tiflis, while the train was waiting at Mozdok, G said to us, there were 4 of us, that I was to go alone to Petersburg while he and the others would stop at Mineralny Vody to go to Kislovodsk. You will stop at Moscow and go to Petersburg afterwards, he said to me, and tell them in Moscow and Petersburg that I am beginning new work here. Those who want to work with me can come, and I advise you not to stay there long. And so this must be a period where G is heading off to France. I believe he had a flat in Paris and also the prayer at Fontainebleau. I said goodbye to G and his companions at Mineralny Vody and travelled on alone. It was clear that nothing remained of my plans for going abroad, but now this no longer troubled me. I did not doubt that we should have to live through a very difficult time, but now it hardly mattered to me. I realized what I had been afraid of. I was not afraid of actual dangers. I was afraid of acting stupidly, that is, of not going away in time when I knew perfectly well what must be expected. Now all responsibility towards myself seemed to have been taken from me. I had not altered my opinions. I could say, as before, that to stay in Russia was madness, but my attitude towards this was quite indifferent. It was not my decision. I travelled still in the old way, alone in a first-class compartment, and near Moscow they charged me excess fare on my ticket because the reservation was issued for one direction and the ticket for another. In other words, everything was as it ought to be. But the papers which I got on the way were full of news about shooting in the streets of Petersburg. Moreover, it was now the Bolsheviks who were shooting into the crowd. They were trying their strength. The situation at this time was beginning to become defined. On the one side were the Bolsheviks, as yet not fully realizing the incredible success which was awaiting them, but already beginning to feel the absence of resistance and to act more and more insolently. On the other side was the second provisional government, with many serious people who understood the situation in the minor posts and with altogether insignificant babblers and theorists in the major posts. And then there was the intelligentsia, greatly decimated by the war, then the remains of former parties and the military circles. All these taken together were divided in their turn into two groups, one who in the face of all the facts and common sense accepted the possibility of peace parleys with the Bolsheviks, who very cleverly made use of this while gradually occupying one position after another, and the other who, while realizing the impossibility of any negotiations whatever with the Bolsheviks, were at the same time not united and did not come out actively into the open. The people were silent, although never perhaps in history has the will of the people been so clearly expressed, and that will was to stop the war. Who could stop the war? This was the chief question of the moment. The provisional government did not dare. Naturally, it could not come from the military circles, and yet power was bound to pass to whoever should be the first to pronounce the word peace. And as often happens in such cases, the right word came from the wrong side. The Bolsheviks pronounced the word peace. First of all, because it was a matter of complete indifference to them what they said. They had no intention of meeting their promissory notes. Therefore, they could issue as many of them as they liked. This was their chief advantage and chief strength. There was something else here besides this. Destruction is always far easier than construction. How much easier it is to burn a house than to build one. The Bolsheviks were the agents of destruction. Neither then nor since could they or can they be anything else, notwithstanding all their boasting and notwithstanding all the support of their open and their hidden friends. But they could and they can destroy very well, not so much by their own activity as by their very existence, which corrupts and disintegrates everything around them. This special property of theirs explained their approaching victory and all that happened much later. We who were looking at things from the point of view of the system could see not only the fact that everything happens, but even how it happens, that is, how easily everything goes downhill and breaks up once a single impulse is given to it. I did not stay in Moscow, but I managed to see a few people while waiting for the evening train to Petersburg, and I passed on to them what G had said. Then I went to Petersburg and passed on the same message to the members of our groups. In 12 days' time I was again in the Caucasus. In Pyatigorsk I learned that G was not living in Kislovodsk, but in Essentuki, and in 2 hours' time I was with him in a small country villa in Panteleimon Street. G asked me in detail about everyone I had seen, what each had said, who was going to come and who not, and so on. Next day 3 more people followed me from Petersburg, then 2 more, and so on. In all excluding G and myself, there foregathered 12 people. And that concludes chapter 16. And again, like we see there, Ouspensky is spending less time with Gurdjieff now. Gurdjieff is going off to, he stays in Essentuki for a time, then goes off to France to establish the centre there. And in a video I'll have coming up at the weekend, I share a lot of biographical works of individuals living with Gurdjieff at the time in France and their sort of portrayals of their time with him. So that's chapter 16. 2 more to go. We're nearly at the end. And yeah, again, these chapters will be less Gurdjieff quotes, more Ouspensky's opinion and his sort of tales of the time, what was going on in this time of war and uncertainty and instability. So yeah, we'll see what comes of that. And like I say, it was interesting there to have a touch from Gurdjieff's family home and his father and Ouspensky's views of that. And like I say, in Meetings with Remarkable Men, when we begin that, we will see much more of that side of Gurdjieff's life. And I'm very much looking forward to share that with you. So, Zanya, thanks for staying with me and joining me for this stream. Everyone watching on Catch Up, I hope you enjoy and take some benefit from that, and that the aspects of the different levels of being and different beings feeding and living in different things and the time in different dimensions sort of gets your mind going and makes you contemplate some of these deep theories and concepts. But I'll be back very soon next week, perhaps with chapter 17 and chapter 18 shortly after that. And I'm very looking forward to starting Meetings with Remarkable Men in the next few weeks. So guys, take care, look after yourselves, do your work, remember yourselves, and I'll see you soon. Bye now.